these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths. We hold these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
This is SITREP number 3, just the news. We're talking about the dates from December 22nd to today, January 3rd. So what happened on January 3rd? Well, Mike Johnson was reelected Speaker of the House. Now, there was, of course, some worry because we Republicans like to make things difficult, and his speakership was under the same shadow that Kevin McCarthy's was, with hardliners threatening to derail another Republican leader. Couldn't lose more than 3 votes in this particular situation, so it's a pretty thin razor sharp line there. Thomas Massie held his own eventually with a phone call from Trump helping along the way. Johnson was able to lock up another 2 votes from Keith Self from Texas and Ralph Norman from South Carolina. So we're all good and shaking hands and happy about our future. And of course, there is some portending that occurs here where we might be forecasting some more difficulties with future votes, whether that's over reconciliation, debt ceiling, or budget. So that's the nature of slim majorities. It is what it is. Get ready for that. There were 7 members who stayed silent when their name was called. Now, remember, these are roll call votes. We don't just press our card into the machine like we usually do on votes. So there's a little bit more ceremony to a vote like this. And they remain silent. Now, that means the clerk will call their name at the end, and at the end of the vote, they did vote for Johnson, but maybe that was a message from them simply saying, we know you have a slim majority, and we will make our voices heard when we need to. If you're asking the question, well, why did Mike Johnson seem to have an easier time than McCarthy did? I'm not sure there's a simple answer to that. My read, just being here on the inside, is that there's just more of a sense of exhaustion. That's really what it's about. There's a sense of exhaustion from being divided, from putting on the show of a 14-round speaker's race for no particular reason. I think that's it. I'm not sure there's a deeper sentiment than that. I think there's an eagerness to get to work under a new president, whereas maybe before with McCarthy's speakership, we all knew that there was a Democrat president, President Biden, and maybe that eagerness simply wasn't there. And so there's maybe more positivity under the current situation that has nothing to do with the personalities of McCarthy or Johnson. It just simply has to do with the political realities we live in, and I think which is a good thing, an eagerness to get to work. So while it may be good news that we elected a speaker on the first round and that we're getting to work, there was some really bad news just a couple days ago, as many of you are aware. We opened up the new year with a wave of terror-related attacks and heightened threats across major U.S. cities. Of course, talking about New Orleans, where an attacker drove his rented truck through a crowd on Bourbon Street. And, of course, in Las Vegas, in Trump Tower, where an Army veteran, also an Army veteran, both Army veterans, put some homemade explosives in a Tesla Cybertruck, shot himself, and then detonated the explosives. There's a lot of scrutiny over whether these are related. We don't know yet. Of course, there's quite a bit of coincidence in the fact that they both happened on the same day. Both Army veterans. People are looking to the fact that they both served at Fort Bragg, although their times at Fort Bragg serving didn't exactly overlap. And I'll also let everyone know that Fort Bragg, actually it's called Fort Liberty now, is a massive, massive Army base. It's pretty difficult for people to know each other. They're still looking into that, though. It is odd. Now, there's a lot of differences between these 2 attackers. Let's talk about New Orleans. So it has been confirmed. It wasn't hard to confirm this because he had an ISIS flag attached to his truck. Of course, the FBI is rightly getting some scrutiny because their first spokesperson said it didn't seem to be terrorist related, and that, of course, seemed like an odd thing to say considering they knew they had an ISIS flag right there. Of course, they've corrected that record and said now very clearly he's obviously ISIS inspired. It's an open question as to whether he was directed by outside ISIS entities. There's just a lot we don't know right now. So who is this guy? He's actually from the Houston area. There was initial reporting that he'd crossed the border illegally, then maybe the truck had crossed the border. We're not actually sure. We do know he's from Houston. born and raised in the United States. His name is Shamsuddin Jabbar. He's an Army veteran. And he lives in appears to be a trailer park. I've seen pictures of it in just the North Houston area. Rented the car and did this. Left evidence, of course, that he was inspired by ISIS. A lot of conversations with friends, family. I recently saw a quote from his neighbor that he thought this was unbelievable. He'd just spoken to him the day before. Saw no signs of this. I've also read that family members were noting strange behaviors, but nothing resembling this. There was talk that there was accomplices. Initially, the FBI understandably thought there was accomplices because they had video of these ice coolers that had improvised explosive devices in them on Bourbon Street, and people were looking at them and interacting with them. And of course, after further investigation, they found that all of those interactions were innocent. People looking to see just what the cooler was or what kind of booze might be inside it. It is Bourbon Street after all. And so right now, appears to be no accomplices. Jabbar decided to do this, and apparently no one who knew him saw any signs of him looking into doing this. Again, a lot more investigation still needs to happen. Carried out the deadly attack by ramming the truck into a crowd while also firing an AR-15 out the window at people, killing at least 14, injuring dozens more. Left 2 IEDs in coolers in the area. Luckily, was not able to get those to go off, although he was apparently trying to detonate them, just to kill as many people as possible. Now, this does seem a little bit different than the case in Las Vegas, where you have a poorly made car bomb by someone who's actually active duty Army. Now, this one's a little bit more mysterious. He's actually based in Germany. We have a lot of our military is based in Germany. For those of you who don't know that, upwards of almost 30,000, I believe. We have a massive amount of support there. Our commands that oversee Europe and the war in Ukraine and Africa are all actually based in Germany. So that's some background for you. He was a Green Beret, Special Forces. We don't know much more than that about his intentions, his motivations, why he did that. There's obviously some symbology. Trump Hotel, there's a Tesla being used, with of course, associated with Elon Musk. So we don't know more than that. We've heard. Again, some of this is initial reporting. I don't think should be taken as gold, but that he was a Trump fan, but maybe worried about future policy. Who knows? It's being a Green Beret with that kind of knowledge of explosives, and then building what was not a very good explosive device, thank God, and then killing yourself before you set it off. It indicates that he knew it was not going to be very destructive, but perhaps perhaps send a signal of sorts. What that is, we're not exactly sure. And again, how do we know it's related to the other one aside from happening on the same day? So far, we don't, except that it's obviously very suspicious that it happened on the same day. At the same time, this isn't just any day. This is January 1st. It is New Year's Day. So it's an exceptional day altogether, and it's possible that it's a coincidence, and it's possible that it's not. We just don't know. It does seem that the motivations are not related. There's no indications right now that the Las Vegas attacker had anything to do with ISIS or was inspired by ISIS. We don't have any evidence of that. Where there's very clear evidence of that in New Orleans. Somewhat significant because we're going to have a majority in the Senate, House, and of course the presidency. And one of the things we care about most is border security. And with border security often comes some form of immigration reform. And there was a bit of a online war in the last week over H-1B visas. Now, I think this was promulgated because Vivek Ramaswamy said something about H-1B visas, of course, how he supports them a lot, and that companies have to support them and use them because I think there's what he called a culture of mediocrity in America, which of course made some people mad. H-1B visas, without saying that there's a culture of mediocrity, are already somewhat contentious. I've heard it from constituents that people have had to train their own replacements. Of course, that's not the intent of an H-1B visa. And the idea is that you can't find this kind of worker here, and so you can use a highly skilled immigrant worker to do that job. But it shouldn't be used to just get cheaper labor from abroad at the expense of Americans, either having to take lower wages or just not getting the job. And so that's where the debate is. And there's an open question as to whether we should look at reforms to H-1B programs, given some of these horror stories, and they are horror stories of people having to train their foreign replacement, or just saying, hey, screw it, we have to do it because there's a culture of mediocrity in America, as Vivek says. And so there was obviously some contention there and some online Twitter wars between what the press would call the MAGA civil war between Vivek and the tech entrepreneurs, more libertarian types, critical conservatives, but good faith ones who really just want to see some reforms to H-1B visa programs. And then there's an entirely other part of the conversation that just doesn't like any immigration at all, let's be honest. Trump himself has always been somewhat moderate on this issue, supporting H-1B visas. Again, you can do two things at once. You can say, like I think Nikki Haley made this point, that our priority should be ensuring that American workers are set up for success. And you do that through education programs, making sure that companies have some skin in the game, want to train American workers, that high schools and colleges want to train their students in the right kind of skill sets for the right kind of jobs that are out there. That is a policy initiative that is in fact possible. We don't have to assume that we just have to take on to accept a culture of mediocrity, again, as Vivek says. And so Nikki Haley, I think, rightfully pointed that out. You can do that while also still allowing an H-1B visa program and perhaps having a realistic conversation about reforms. So we'll see where that goes in the coming months, if anywhere. In other important U.S. economic news, Biden has blocked the sale of U.S. steel to Nippon Steel. Nippon Steel is a Japanese steel company. He did as he said he would. Should be noted, Trump has also said that he would block the same deal. Biden blocked the proposal, citing national security concerns and the need to safeguard America's steelmaking capabilities. So the fact that both President Biden and President Trump have announced opposition to this, I think, it's a marker of an increased trade protectionism that is occurring in our country. I think some of which is very much warranted. But this is an interesting case. So I'm going to tell you why the people who are for this merger or this acquisition are for it. Now, there's legitimate concerns on both sides of this. For years, this is for the people this is what they would argue who say that the Japanese company Nippon Steel should actually acquire U.S. Steel. They would say that for years, U.S. Steel has faced financial challenges. It's been slow to innovate, incorporate new technologies, and they need an influx of capital. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, has never concluded that the sale represented a national security concern, but Biden bypassed them anyway. Again, this is Japan. We're not talking about a Chinese company. This is Japan, a very close ally. It's also worth noting, as part of the deal, it was a $14 billion deal. Nippon Steel pledged to invest an extra $2.7 billion in two of U.S. steel plants, as part of a modernization project aimed at making the facilities more competitive with international rivals. U.S. Steel CEO David Burritt warned that if the firm's acquisition by Nippon Steel fell through, the company would likely close steel mills in Pennsylvania and Indiana, and because these were slated to receive these multi-billion-dollar upgrades in the acquisition. Others would argue that the decision to stop this acquisition has a chilling effect on international investment in America as a whole. Foreign investors might become hesitant to even bother pursuing these deals if they're going to be blocked. Now, the people who are against the sale say that it's important for the defense industrial base. They're concerned about giving control of part of our domestic steel industry to a foreign firm. Others might argue against it on the basis of U.S. job loss. And U.S. Steel's now it's worth noting, U.S. Steel's a pretty small employer, only about 14,000 employees. But again, those employees are concentrated in small areas. So even if it's only 14,000 jobs, it's 14,000 jobs in a relatively concentrated area, which has a huge effect on that local town. Now, again, the people who are for this say you're not going to lose any jobs. In fact, you're protecting those jobs. You're going to lose those jobs if you don't do the acquisition. And you know what? We're never going to know. All right. What we're going to see is that since the deal is now blocked, what actually happens. And if indeed some of these mills have to close, that would be pretty terrible. Pretty terrible. I told you so by the people who were for the deal. Also worth noting, as far as defense is concerned, very little is actually acquired from these firms. Only about 1% to 3%, I think, of U.S. steel is sold to the defense industry. And there's certain things like U.S. Navy armor, some vehicle armor that is some high quality steel that is bought from a couple of these locations. So if you recall, earlier this year, we passed a bill out of Congress that was signed into law that is effectively a TikTok ban. Said that a company like TikTok had to be owned by a U.S. entity. So it could be for sale, and there was a deadline to that. If not, it would be effectively banned from being used in the United States. Pretty controversial, especially by TikTok users. Of course, it passed for good reason because TikTok is owned by a Chinese company, ByteDance. They're known to acquire U.S. data. And here's the thing. From a national security perspective, an entity like TikTok that has so popular, and again, why is this controversial? Because it's so popular. Well, they can mess with the algorithms. They can show you what they want you to see. There's evidence of this happening around the world. And they're collecting your data. You might not care about your data, but data can be used to build pretty powerful, say, AI tools that can then really effectively, basically conduct information warfare, misinformation warfare against the American people should the Chinese choose to do so. These are all just basic facts and reasons to be concerned about TikTok. It can be used as a weapon inside the United States should the Chinese choose to do so. That's just the facts. Now there's some arguments about First Amendment issues that you can't just ban a company. I have a lot of trouble seeing those arguments. We're not talking about somebody's ability to engage in speech freely in America. We're talking about the ability of a foreign company to actively operate inside the U.S. Foreign companies don't have constitutional rights inside the United States. They just don't. If we want to say that this company can't operate here, well, how is that different from imposing, say, a tariff or other restrictions like we do on companies like Huawei, for instance? It's hard to see how there's a difference there. That being said, the more compelling argument is simply the fact that it's a problem for the users of TikTok. Okay, obviously the users of TikTok were very upset about this, especially people who own small businesses. Now I don't know where these numbers come from, but they probably come from TikTok. But they'll suggest that they contributed $24 billion to U.S. GDP in 2023. $15 billion of which generated by small and medium-sized businesses through advertising and reach that supports over 200,000 jobs, generated $5 billion in taxes last year. Maybe. I mean, are all of these businesses only on TikTok? They can't possibly operate on other social media platforms. I'm a little skeptical of these numbers. Either way, the fact is you can't allow a foreign entity that is controlled by a foreign government, and all companies in China are controlled by the foreign government. Even TikTok has a CCP person that is required to be on their board. That's just how they operate out there. They're required to be a tool of the Chinese intelligence agencies. That's by Chinese law. So despite the fact that people like it and use it, of course, there's some serious drawbacks, which is why it passed in the first place. What's going to be interesting and why we're even talking about this now is because that deadline is coming up, January 19th. And President Trump, but unexpected, I wasn't expecting this, has filed an amicus brief through the Solicitor General nominee urging the Supreme Court to delay the TikTok ban. Now, it's just a delay. That's not an outright opposition to the issue, but it seems as though they're asking for more time to figure it out. Obviously, no one has bought the platform. That would have been my hope personally. Seems like actually a pretty good thing to buy. I'm surprised if some investors in America didn't get together and do that. But nevertheless, they're seeking some time for the incoming administration to negotiate a political resolution. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I don't think the First Amendment arguments are very good. I really don't. I mean, if what kind of precedent does that set for just anyone who wants to who wants to take advantage of our free and fair democracy to their own end, especially if you're a Chinese Communist Party. That shouldn't make sense to anybody just on the merits. So more to follow on that. Okay, so let's go around the world real quick. A quick update on Syria. As you recall from our last SITREP, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, and allied groups launched a rapid offensive just a few weeks ago, capturing key cities and reaching Damascus by December, forcing Assad to flee to Russia. Now, Assad is effectively a puppet government of Iran, and Russia has been. They've been in power as a family for 50 years. So this is a pretty massive change, and it happened all of a sudden. It was followed by airstrikes by Israel and the United States, really targeting ISIS camps, weapons depots by Iran. We don't want anyone to have access to a lot of these weapons, especially the more advanced munitions held by the government. That being said, in recent weeks, there's been a number of somewhat successful diplomatic meetings with the new government from the EU, from France, from Germany, from the United States. And while there's a lot of cause for caution, there's some cause for optimism, but also, we don't really have a choice. We're not really going to go in there and change anybody's mind or change power. So this is the people that we're all going to work with for the moment. And for the most part, they're saying the right things. Now, make no mistake, their HTS is tied to Al-Qaeda. The good news is they're also enemies of ISIS, so they don't like each other. Now, granted, in the Middle East, a lot of radical Muslim sects don't like each other. It's a game of power more than anything else. It doesn't mean that their underlying ideology is too different. That being said, again, they're saying mostly the right things, that they want an inclusive government and a democratic form of government even, although they won't hold elections for a few years, as they seek to put technocrats in place and just get the basics done. They say they just want to put electricity out for the people and focus on food and water. So from a basic stability perspective, which is, if you take a step back and look at America's interest in all of this, what's our main interest is stability. World chaos, people invading other countries, things all along those lines, they create chaos, they mess with global supply chains, they mess with America's way of life, they mess with Americans' deterrence, and that's bad for your kids and grandkids. You may not care in the short run, but trust me, it's bad for your kids and grandkids. Our boys on D-Day back in 1944 decided that America would run the show, and ever since then you've had it pretty good, whether you know it or not. So, taking a step back, that's generally why you care. And so we're cautiously optimistic about what's happening in Syria. Of course, there'll be consistent demands, I think, and rightfully so, of accountability, verifiable reforms, protection of minorities, more transparent governance, and ensuring that they're countering Russian and Iranian influence. Of course, again, HTS, who took over, they are not friendly with the Russians. They've been bombed by the Russians many times, probably. And they are not friendly with Iran. This is all good news for Israel. This is good news for the United States. But we're going to want to see some proof of that, of course. So more to come on that. Let's talk about South Korea. Really interesting morning over there where there's a standoff between the impeached president, Yoon Suk-yeol, and we'll get to why he was impeached in a minute. There's a standoff between his security, which includes his personal security, their version of Secret Service, the South Korean military, against anti-corruption investigators who are trying to arrest him because he's failed to answer multiple subpoenas. That's how I understand it. Now this is quite the drama, and we'll go into the background here right now. On December 3rd, South Korea's president declared martial law. All of a sudden, this surprised everybody. Well, at least all of us. I don't know if it surprised anyone in South Korea. Now, why did he declare martial law? Now, there's what he said, and then there's what I suppose people might analyze why he did it. He said that he did it because there's North Korean influence in the parliament, and this was stopping certain judicial reforms. Analysts might argue that it was really more due to political challenges. The parliament is controlled by the opposition party, the Democratic Party. I'm not sure how much, but they apparently won by a landslide in the recent elections. Reduced the budget that the president has, and obviously gave him a lot of headaches over judicial reforms that he wanted. What those were, I'm not sure. And so he decided to create martial law. Quite the flex, of course. And now, it didn't go so well. Parliament overturned that declaration within hours in a unanimous vote. Now, unclear to me whether that unanimous vote was the like his party and the opposition party voting together.
Yeah.
Okay, so everyone was like, no, this is a bad idea. He really flexed too hard. But then there's an impeachment that occurs on December 14th where, if I understand it correctly, his party walked out, but the opposition party went ahead with the impeachment.
Don't know about the dates, but there was one attempt at impeachment where his party wasn't there, so they couldn't have a quorum. And then the second impeachment, they were there and they impeached him. Okay.
So I'm assuming it takes just a majority to impeach, and it appears to work. We're kind of guessing here because there's not a lot of great news on how South Korea works. So I'm trying to explain it to y'all the best I can. It might work like here, where like you get impeached by the House and the Senate goes through its actual judgments. Now there's a constitutional court that does so. So in effect, he's technically still the president, as far as we can tell. But I'm not giving you a civics class in South Korea and parliamentary procedures. To add to the drama, and this is like a really soap opera. From December 14th to the 27th, the acting president was President Han Duck-soo. So there is an acting president, so I guess he's impeached. There's an acting president, even though he's not convicted yet. But they also impeached him on December 27th, which suspended him from office. So that leaves us with a fundamental question of who is actually president there. Apparently, the military still answers to the President Yul because they're protecting him from investigators arresting him. Either way, this is quite the political crisis in South Korea and quite the drama that we'll continue to follow and try our best to explain to you. And that's the news for SITREP 3.